Hey, Ski Southeast, and all of my friends here in the Southeastern ski community and boarding community. I thought we'd kick off this season talking about my seasonal forecast. And, you probably have seen a bazillion if you're a snow hound like me and you want to see as much information as possible. You probably look at a bazillion of these forecasts. But let me kind of give you the nuts and bolts of the upcoming winter. And you probably at nauseum have heard a lot about El Nino. And let's focus on that initially because it is a big part of the upcoming season. We've had some pretty bad winter seasons the last couple of years because we've been in a really persistent La Nina pattern. La Nina is warm and dry for the Southeast. And if you skied at all in the last couple of seasons, you know what we're talking about. The snowmakers, they have won the day. They've really helped us out, but it really is, it's been a rough stretch. But El Nino, what does it mean for us? Well, typically, El Nino gives us this really active subtropical jet. This is the key to the whole season and why El Nino winters tend to produce a lot of storm systems. Now, typically it's cooler and wetter in an El Nino pattern for the southeast, but there's one little fly in the ointment that's really affecting the El Nino this year. Is it's a really strong El Nino, but we've got a lot of warm air over the northern hemisphere and then the Atlantic. The thing that makes me more concerned than anything about this El Nino pattern is just how much of a storm track is this going to allow for warm air to get pulled inland? What I mean by that is if you get strong low pressure systems in the southeast, it can tap into that warm, humid air, which is great. You want the moisture, but you don't want this storm track to be too far inland because what happens is it pulls some of that warm marine air all the way back to the northwest, and you end up seeing more cold rain than snow. The only thing that works in the favor is in the mountains. Obviously, that added elevation could reduce that risk overall. So for snow lovers that are maybe in the Piedmont or the Carolinas, Virginia, outside of the mountainous areas, probably not the perfect setup for a snowy winter. Though you give me this storm track and I will take it every single year because that is going to allow for more opportunities for big storms. We look at all this warm water, you see it's just everywhere. I mean, this is a big part of it. Warm water produces big storms, but it also produces warm air above it. So you don't want to see too much of that warm air getting inland. So the upcoming season does look really, really good for the mountains. And let's talk a little bit about my forecast for the Southeast. So I have this little checklist I use. I'm going to move my head out of the way here. El Nino phase, cold and wet. So those ingredients would mean cold and wet. Problem with Siberian or Eurasian snowfall, if you've watched anybody or hear anybody talk about this, what we're talking about here is snowfall in October in parts of Siberia have a huge correlation to cold and snow on the East Coast. So we didn't have a bunch there. It was near average. So that would favor warm and wet. Arctic sea ice near record lows. When you have low sea ice or low snow cover and ice coverage in the northern hemisphere, it just reduces the reservoir of cold air to come down. Doesn't mean we don't have cold air up there. It just means it's smaller. And when we do get cold air to come south into the lower 48, it tends to be sharper troughs and not big sprawling areas of Arctic air over the whole U.S. And then climate change. The climate is getting warmer. We're seeing warmer winters and those above sea surface temperatures above average, that helps contribute to warmer winters and less snow. So this year with all that warm water, that's why we're kind of leaning towards a warmer, wetter, but there's a question mark for cold because I think outside of the mountains, it's going to be a little warmer, but in the mountains of the Southeast, we're likely going to see above average snowfall. This is the rainfall or precipitation forecast. Now this includes snow. So you see really strong signals for above average precipitation in the Southeast. But here's the good news for snow and ice. I actually think we'll be slightly above for snowfall in the mountains of North Carolina, the Virginias, all the way up into the southern parts of Pennsylvania. And the reason I think that this is going to be an above average snowfall year for the mountains is because of that active storm track. If we go back to El Nino, this active storm track throwing moisture inland, the benefit of elevation, having the temperatures be cold enough for snow is more likely in the mountains of the Southeast than it is outside. That warm, humid air that we talked about that's kind of over the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, it might make it into the inland areas of the Piedmont, but it'll have a tough time getting far enough west to interact in the mountains and cause issues. The other thing that works great for this is that track, if it stays on the coast, we get upslope snow events, not northwest flow, but southeast flow. You can get upslope on the eastern facing slope. So areas like Appalachian Ski Mountain and places like Winter Place, and then you go up into Western Virginia, not West Virginia, on the eastern facing slopes. Those tend to do a little bit better with storm tracks on the East Coast. So you get that flow coming in from the Atlantic, giving you higher snowfall amounts. And then on the backside of the storm, you get the northwest flow for all the resorts that are facing the northwest. Let's look at some seasonal guidance here, because one of the things that I look at quite frequently is once we get into the seasonal time, I start looking at some of the long range stuff. So what you're looking at here is we're going to look at December, January, February from the Euro. This is their seasonal forecast from their model. They'll run this again on December 1st. This was initialized at the first day of November. They'll run it again. It's a monthly forecast. You could see for the Southeast, there's actually that gray is near average and then some hints of blue down here. So that hints at near average temperatures. That's good because the last 3 winters, it's been nothing but warm. So it's weird to say, but near average is actually going to feel cool to us because of how warm it's been recently. So this is good news. That means it's not blazing hot. It's going to be warm as heck, it looks like, in Eastern Canada, which will be interesting because that might be hinting at some negative NAO or Arctic oscillations, which might help us out on the East Coast. So that's a strong signal there. Let's look at precipitation. If we look at precipitation, there's a strong signal here. All that green is above average. Whoops, go back there. Is above average precipitation. So the combination of having near average temperatures and then having all this above average precipitation is a good thing. Let me go back here. I keep losing my cursor. There we go. So the storm track, this favored storm track up the East Coast is hinted at in the model. So the fact that the long range guidance is already pegging this, and for the December, January, February timeframe, it is a good sign. If you break this down by month, though, it's kind of interesting. So let's go to month. We'll do December 1st. And we lost the December data. Let me see if I can pull up December here. We'll do it month by month, which makes it kind of interesting. So if we do it by month, I was showing you all 3 months of the season. This is December, okay? December looks like it's going to be warmer than average. So that's why I think if we get off to a warm start, don't worry. I mean, we're kind of expecting it to be a warm start to the season. It's been a pretty warm fall, right? I think that's going to be the same case as we go into December. But as we go towards the first of the year, let's go to January. Look what happens in January. January shows a big below average anomaly over the Southeast. So as warm as December was, it could be the flip for January. And let's go to February. February shows the same thing. So what you're seeing in this forecast is this is going to be a backloaded winter based on the seasonal forecasting. It's going to be warm early and then get cold late. And let's go to March. Maybe we'll have an extended season. Okay, March, it starts to warm up a little bit, but the fact that January and February are showing that cold air is a good sign. If we look at precipitation there, we'll do the same thing. We'll go to December 1st. Wet in December, even though it looks above average, looks pretty wet in January, and February looks really wet as well. So you're seeing that really strong, and March is wet as well. So there's all really strong confidence in that wet forecast for the Southeast, and potentially kind of cool. So let's go back to the seasonal forecast. We'll recap. Near average temperatures, maybe slightly below for the mountains, but the above average precipitation. This is great news for the Southeast resorts. I think at the very least, I can be very confident and tell you we are going to have more snow this winter than we did in the past 3 winters. That is a pretty strong signal. But I will caution you, it's probably going to be a slow start to the season. It looks pretty warm going into December, but then the switch kind of flips there as we go into January and February. So don't get worried if it looks like the season's off to a rough start. Last year was the opposite. Remember, we had the cold December and then it was never winter again. This year could be the complete opposite. It could start slow and then crank up as the season goes on. So keep thinking snow. I'll put out my first forecast for the weekend, maybe after Thanksgiving. We'll do that later this week. But I wanted to give a heads up what I thought for the entire season as we look ahead to another ski season here in the Southeast.